I'm happy to see all of you back for the final session of this week's forum. And today is an opportunity, I suppose, for us to widen out the conversation, bring in some thinking from the previous 4 days, some ideas from the previous 4 speakers. And also, I suppose, to move on, because we have we've given ourselves the title today of Learning to Shape a New World. And I think that's an important idea. Today, on our news bulletins, wherever we are in the world, well, at least I hope, wherever we are in the world, we are listening to news reports from COP26 in Glasgow, which is coming towards reaching some agreement on a final document. Of course, we've been listening to this for the last 2 weeks, and it's like the coming and going of the tide. We make progress, we retreat, we make some progress, we retreat. And I think it is important for us on this moment to think about our missions, what we do as people committed to lifelong learning in different contexts and different places, and to see how what we can do to reshape this new world. It strikes me that maybe since the end of the Second World War, we have started to move in a direction of greater international cooperation and collaboration. We attempted, I suppose, to create things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where we wanted to create a scenario where human rights were commonly understood across the world, and that all human beings on the planet, regardless of where they lived, would have access to a minimum standard of human rights. Now, we know that this has been patchy, let's say. It's been successful in some contexts and less successful in others. We also have introduced many international conventions, treaties, agreements, and international law has become a much greater thing. So in some ways, we can say that there has been a huge advance in terms of recognizing the rights of people, in terms of creating international conventions and so on. But very often when the international communities meet to make these international agreements, global agreements, we can see the normal behavior is that the delegates come by and large with a commitment to their national interest, and they try to defend their national interest in terms of whatever agreement is being reached. At the end of the day, they somehow agree in a sort of implied understanding that very many of them will retreat from the commitments they have just made. Maybe not hugely, but they will all, or by and large, most of them will retreat a little bit. Now, of course, gains have been made, because the next time we meet, the next time we try to make agreements, we can kind of nudge the thing on a little bit from where we were before, and we do make progress. COP26 is presenting us with a different type of scenario, in the sense that we can almost certainly say that whatever final agreement is reached is not enough. It will be far short of where we need to be. So there isn't any movement or space for movement for national interest to retreat. But of course, old habits are very hard to break, and there will be, I suppose, a tendency for nation states to retreat from their commitments. Now, we know that this is an extremely perilous situation to have ourselves in. And as adult educators, we have to ask ourselves, can we do something in this space in terms of trying to move on this very critical agenda, this most critical agenda? I know that my colleague Nicholas would have been watching the UNESCO Learning Cities Conference in South Korea 2 weeks ago. And I haven't spoken to him about his view on the outcome of that. But to me, it seemed that in the Learning Cities Conference, the UNESCO Learning Cities Conference, they got captured by COVID. And they spoke almost exclusively around the idea of health as the critical pressing agenda for learning cities. Now, COVID is, of course, a really important issue, but climate change is a far more compelling agenda. So, in a sense, we responded to the lesser of the two critical agendas. And I just wondered about that. Why did we do that? And one of the things I think that's really important is the idea of cognitive flexibility. That is to be able to think in new ways about the problems we face, not to try and use the old ways to solve the problems in ways that brought us to where we are. And cognitive flexibility is one of the great outcomes of lifelong learning projects, giving people the capacity to see and think about the world in a different way. It also strikes me that the idea of critical thinking, in some ways, our critical thinking faculties are less acute now, maybe, than they had been in the past. How do we hear in what we do the voices of the most vulnerable? I was listening to an interview earlier today from one of the, I think the Prime Minister of one of these micronations that could disappear under the waves. Are they being heard? Are we listening to them? And this very important issue and this very, very important project, which we hear all of the time, leave no one behind. How do we manage to leave no one behind? And today, as well, on the news, on the eastern frontiers of Europe, we have something like 2,000 people living in freezing conditions in tents in Belarus. Those have certainly been left behind, and we have migrants all over Europe, and many of those are left behind, and they are at the frontiers of Europe as well. So we have a lot of thinking to do in relation to how we leave no one behind. So in terms of thinking about this new world, I think our challenge is to think in creative ways that are new ways of thinking in relation to addressing those. So I just wanted to maybe just throw that out as a sort of a beginning point. Now, we're lucky today, we have all the speakers that were here earlier in the week. And I know that I'll just go through them quickly. And I know that Annalisa has very tight time constraints. So maybe we will maybe move you up to the top of the agenda in a little while. So on Monday, Christina gave us a really, really interesting masterclass on cities and the Anthropocene. So that set the scene for the week. And on Tuesday, we had Amin, and he spoke about racism and the spread of racism. And again, this was a fairly chilling situation in relation to many of the things that are happening there. And then on Wednesday, and I missed this completely, Nicholas, because this was the day my electricity decided not to work. So I apologize that I wasn't able to attend because I'm very, very, very deeply engaged in learning cities, but this was the one session I missed completely. So between transition and adaptation, a double helix modelization for learning cities and territories. And he was speaking from Clermont-Ferrand, which is a sister city with Cork in the UNESCO Global Cities Project. And then on Thursday, yesterday, we had Annalisa from Cornell in New York State, speaking of self-directed learning with friends and communities of practice, which was, again, a very, very interesting session. And I'm happy that Javier has also joined us today, and I had a conversation with him on Wednesday as well, and we've already spoken about how Xavier will contribute. And he's going to maybe listen to the other contributions and then come in with some topics. And then we will throw it open for everybody to discuss. I'd like us to break with the order we had during the week, because I'm conscious that Annalisa is under a little bit of pressure. So we might go backwards in that regard and start with the most recent one, and maybe start with you, Annalisa.
Would you just like me to recap or add a few extra?
Yes, I think what I'd like is maybe if you just maybe focus on one key learning from your perspective that would contribute to this, and or maybe if you want to do, I'm not sure to what extent you had an opportunity to see some of the other sessions, and there may be something from one of the other sessions that you'd like to draw on as well.
Okay, great. So when you ask us what can we as adult educators do, I think I'd like to refer back to Donella Meadows' leverage points, places to intervene in a system that I spoke about yesterday. And if you get toward the more impactful, the more effective, more exponential change levers that she identified, they are things like the power to self-organize system structures, the power to change the goals of the system, the mindset that the paradigm or the system assumptions came out of. So as adult educators, what can we do that prepares ourselves and our students to be able to make those kinds of, to work in those leverage point places? And I'm thinking about things like not only teaching the soft skills and the arts of democracy, the how do we work together collaboratively, the critical thinking skills that you were talking about, Seamus, but how do we do so in a way that promotes learning for all, that promotes the cumulative wisdom of the group, and that challenges and hones and refines the wisdom of the group. So I'm thinking about not only the content we present, but the way that we teach and the way that we make our teaching practice decisions transparent, so that it's making visible those intangibles of design and facilitation, because those are the sorts of things that empower students to be able to constructively and productively participate in these concerted efforts that we as Team Humanity in small groups and large have to do in order to turn the ship around in terms of where we're headed with the climate. Sucked all the air out of the room, did I? Sorry.
Yeah, you sucked the air out of my lungs, so I was my lips were moving. I was trying to see how good you are at lip reading, Annalisa. Sorry about that. That's the second time. That's the second time in the one session that I've muted myself and forgot to unmute. So I was suggesting we would just keep going back the week for the moment, and then people can respond to all the contributions together. So Nicholas, you are the next one. So maybe we'll go to you next.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it's difficult to have just one or two words, keywords, but maybe about our work here in France around Clermont-Ferrand, maybe that the first key message will be that in a world in transition, in world fighting against crises about global changing, the best word for me, for us, probably can be translation. Why? Translation, it's about how we can trying to put a good interconnection between different cities, in a territory, in a state, between different cities in Europe, in the world, because it's the challenge. We are thinking that it's the challenge, the interconnection between cities, because learning cities, it's for us something about learning territories. It's that way we are thinking that the interconnection between cities in a territory can be probably the best way to be in a transition and resilient world. And we are thinking about our work here in our area. We are thinking that the best cities to be in a learning way, in the best learning way, the best city can be probably the little one. The little cities have sometimes more capacities to be in the best learning way, and it's more difficult for the biggest. The biggest one are more in an institutional obstacle, that it's something difficult for the biggest city to be in an efficient learning way. That's why we are thinking that between the little one and the biggest one, the best way of learning territories is the interconnection between little and big city in territories. That's why we are thinking more about learning territories than learning cities. And we are thinking that in this kind of way to be a learning territory, we are thinking that researchers have missions about this translation. We have to be between these cities. We have to be a good translators. We have to trying to put the interconnection in the best way. And researchers are, we are thinking, often really important in this process to be in interconnection. That's why we are thinking that in a transition and resilient world, learning territories are territories in interconnection between little and big cities, and researchers are good translators for doing that.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. That's a really interesting idea, an interesting concept. Thank you. And we're going back to Amin. You're next, and you're on Tuesday. So over to you, Amin.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Just following Annalisa's conversation about learning and education, I think this that education is not only teaching maths, science, languages, and so on, but it is also educating ourselves and our children. Therefore, I distinguish between education and educating. So our responsibility is not only educating our students or young generation or our children, but also our leaders and our teachers. So if we want to start any education or educating people, then we have to think not only about young people, but also about leaders and teachers. So unfortunately, the system they built in whole the world, not only in a particular place or in particular country, is somehow going in a wrong way. I mean the neoliberalistic system, the neoliberalism. You can witness in all, not maybe all parts of the world, but in the most of parts of the world. And you can see that capitalism expanding its roots anywhere, everywhere, any part of the world. And the motto and the teaching of capitalism is that the power and wealth is there on the top of there, go get it. Okay, that is the most important thing. And it doesn't matter what will happen and how you will press people and oppress people or destroy things to get that. It doesn't matter. Just try to get it. If you can get that power and wealth, it is there, then you are successful. Otherwise, not. That is what we are learning at the time we are living in our contemporary world. And our children, they are learning the same, and somehow ourselves, we are engaged too, unfortunately. And what I am saying, if we will continue in this way, then in the future, we will have mess and chaos in all societies, in the whole the world, because we don't think about caring and sharing more. It is only me. It is about individualism. Okay, that happened indeed from 1970, maybe not 1970, 78, 9, if I am not wrong. Yes, 1978 and 9, when Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan from the US, they had a meeting and they decided to privatize everything. It was not the beginning of the neoliberalism, because the neoliberalism idea started from 1936 or 1939, that time. But they started a system that time that everything you want, you can reach if you have power and wealth. Okay, it is about only privatization and the power and wealth. That is about individualism. Okay, if we think in this way, so what they created, I don't want to talk about the free market or free trade or so on. They were talking about just from that time we could see how neoliberalism roots is expanding to the other parts of the world. So we don't care who is poor in the other part of the world and whether they have water, about the climate change, Seamus was mentioning, whether there is a climate issue there, and we had in a small part of Africa HIV. We didn't care. We said, this is not our problem, it is their problem. But now, in any part of the world we are walking, or we are going there, we can see that at least a few people, they are in hospital and they are suffering from HIV. It is about the climate change the same, and about education the same, about the poverty and so on. So we are so interconnected and so intertwined that we cannot ignore anyone in the world, any part of the world. Okay, we are living not only in our planet Earth, but also we are living all universe. We are responsible for all universe. Okay, not only only to our place where we are living. So that is the problem, and now they are thinking about rationalization, and we can see that they are highlighting technology. I say that technology is good. I'm using technology now to communicate with you. I'm using technology for good things. But now when I'm saying technology, I mean, for example, making bombs, nuclear bombs, and selling billions of weapons to Saudi Arabia, Iran, or Syria, or other countries, Russia from one side and the US from the other side. Other European countries are involved too. That is the problem we have. Okay, we had the First World War, we didn't learn anything. We published many books, many articles. We published documentaries, and we made movies, and then what happened? Learning is difficult for us. I think so, because we didn't learn anything. After that, we experienced the Second World War. Now they are with this business they have, I mean, weapon business. It seems that we will, I hope not, I hope not, but it seems that we are moving in that direction to the Third World War. And it is about education. Our children, as I mentioned last time, we have to educate them because at the moment we can experience racism, not only in our public places, on the media, and particularly the social media, but also if your child, you don't need to go to the secondary school. If your child is an immigrant and studying in any secondary school, particularly in Ireland, is better than other countries, because I was in Germany and other countries, it is worse there. But if your child is immigrant and going to the secondary school, then you will understand how races are active in secondary schools, and how they are forming the public sphere, and particularly manipulating the young generation in the secondary school, and how they are trying to spread racism, unfortunately. So we need to start educate.
Could I just stop you there, because we don't have too much time. I just wanted to go around the other panel members as well.
Please, yes, sir, excuse me.
You know, you're fine, it's fine. But we can come back, and there'll be an opportunity to put in as well. But I just want to get around to the other panel members first, and then also maybe try and get some conversation going from the attendees. So Christine, you're next, and you started the week Cities and the Anthropocene on Monday.
Okay, hi everyone. Well, first of all, I want to apologize for the poor quality of the picture, but as we are in bank holiday here, I'm in the basement of my mother's, so it's not really convenient for that kind of exercise. So if I had to find a word to say how I think that we have to work to respond to all these challenges, I would say imaginaries. Well, I have developed on Monday that I think we need to craft new imaginaries to replace the one that we have inherited from capitalism. And I think that we have to collectively design a desired and reachable future in a partnership with nature. That's what I have always said on Monday. But I think that to answer your question about strategies of learning, I also think that we have to craft imaginations about educational or pedagogical methods. Well, actually in France, I'm a bit scared that our university will get advantage from the mastery of online classes and communication that we have developed during the pandemic to choose to make more and more classes online. And I think this will be a disaster. Well, first of all, I don't like it at all, even if I recognize that, of course, it's some saving from carbon dioxide from planes, of course. But I think that especially when you teach people, when you try to have that transmission of knowledge and to do that translation that Nicola previously mentioned, I think that you must absolutely have some moments in common, I mean, physically in common. So I think that we have to think about all that, to invent some other way to teach, to mix probably media and presential classes to try to fit that new challenges. And to end with this, I have a question. For example, I'm working these times on a new diploma new course for long life education. It's a program on how to revitalize the center of medium-sized towns that have been deserted due to the malls and all commercial infrastructures. And when I worked on the program with the authority that will that help financing the course, I tried to mention climate change, and I realized that that was not that problem at all. That their problem was to make the commercial activities develop better in the center of their town. So before you have questions for me, I have a question for you. How can we introduce, because I think that we absolutely must do that. How can you introduce those new world requirements in every of our courses, even if our governance or our financials do not agree with that? So I will say that we have to, well, apart from imaginaries, I think that we do not have much choice from now, and we have to be very committed. So that would be my second and last word.
Thank you very much, Christine. I had resonances there of my own challenge against two things that my university very, very keen on: semesterization, where everything was boxed into nice, neat packages with a certain number of hours and a certain number of learning outcomes. And when you go into the whole world of learning outcomes, for me, you're already deciding where you want the learner to get to. And I'm not sure that's always a good idea. So anyway, thank you very much, Christine. And Xavier, you've had an opportunity to listen to a lot of different presentations there, and maybe some ideas of your own or some reflections on what we've heard so far.
Thank you, Seamus, and hello, everybody. I mean, let me start by thanking you for the opportunity to join in this conversation, if only because I don't think there's many topics that could be more interesting for a discussion on education than the transition towards a new world order in learning strategies, which is the topic of this week. But then the question that comes to mind is, are we really in a transition towards a new world of learning? And I think it's a fair question, because changes in education, and particularly in higher education, have actually been remarkably slow over time. I mean, imagine if, say, Darwin or Hegel were suddenly transported from their alma mater to today, their same university. What would really surprise them if they happen to come back to, say, Edinburgh or Cambridge or Tübingen? Well, not much, actually. They would immediately recognize the classrooms, they would recognize the degrees, the disciplines, the governance of universities, and there will be only, I think, two things that will really surprise them. One is the number of people, the sheer number of people at university, and the second, the sheer number of women. Women teaching, women learning, women conducting research everywhere. That would have really shocked them, but not much more. Or think about technology. I mean, Edison said in 1913 that books would disappear in a decade because the cinematograph that he invented would be much more capable of teaching anything than a book. And look where we are 100 years later. So some things really don't change very much in education. But then, if there is one lesson from the pandemic we're still living, is that radical change and innovation are actually possible, even in, and especially in, public institutions. I mean, look at how many hospitals or universities have gone paperless in their management in a matter of months. This would have been thought impossible just a couple of years ago. And after all, COVID-19 is the triumph of knowledge, of learning, of scientific cooperation, of interdisciplinarity, and the failure of politics and political cooperation. And even more importantly, COVID has shown that the challenges of our societies, as many of you have been saying right now, are far more complex than they have ever been and far more dependent on knowledge. So I guess one could argue that universities can and should play a more strategic, more ambitious, more active role in shaping a new world. How to achieve that is the question. And I think the answer is mostly summarized in two words, lifelong learning, because universities can not just offer education and research, but maybe act as an open platform and a benchmark for trust and security for the transmission of knowledge in a world that has lost that trust and that security. They can go from a closed business model aimed at captive students and keeping them very close to the chest, to becoming a platform that enables a future for everyone, not just for the smarter or for the young or for those who can afford a higher education diploma. That is continuous education, which is the only kind of education I guess we should all have. And perhaps the future of higher education is not the university, but the network of universities. And this is maybe the time for ULLL and others to offer, by example, a new model of multilateral cooperation. So maybe just to I think, help the conversation if I can, ULLL may wish to reflect on the way we think about university education Why organize universities in disciplines when knowledge is interdisciplinary and innovation antidisciplinary? Why offer only degrees when citizens need a lifetime subscription that gives them access to the knowledge produced by the university? Why give them a degree rather than a subscription to access to the knowledge that the university produces? Why suppose that the norm should be to train in a single institution and not in a network of institutions? Now, I realize that when you come to the real world of university, at least in continental Europe, this may seem unrealistic and actually unfair for universities because they have enough challenges as it is in surviving with all the financial constraints and management constraints. But public institutions alone, as we have seen throughout the pandemic, don't have the legitimacy or the capacity to implement the kind of changes we're seeing. Look at COP26, as Seamus was saying. So universities can help, I think, break the resistance to change and take sides in the face of the challenges that we have, socioeconomic, technological, environmental, that we will inevitably have to face as a global society, as Amin was saying. So after all, I mean, can anybody think of a better argument than the pandemic we have just lived, not just for UCAN, but for any strong multilateral institution and for global government? I think this is the lesson to take home, and I'm delighted to be able to join this conversation modestly with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xavier. But I think your pessimism on change in the education system is completely overstated. This week in Ireland, the Ombudsman for Children responded to a UNESCO call on Ireland to radically change the Leaving Cert, which is the high school examination in Ireland, because of its oppressive nature on children. And the Irish government rolled up its sleeves and said, we will immediately act on this and we will change it instantly. By 2030, we anticipate we will be able to introduce reform. So they're taking nine years to think about something that UNESCO is saying, you need to change this thing now, today, before you destroy the lives of more children. And they say, oh yes, we're going to do it instantly. So
I mean, for any policymaker, when you hear 2030 or 2050, the word that comes to mind is somebody else's problem.
Yeah. So look, I think we've got a lot of very interesting ideas here, and I'd like to throw it open now. But I do think there is a connection there. At least I see a connection between all the speakers, because things like neoliberalism is in there somewhere in all of these, and the kinds of pressures that are on universities and on educators as a consequence of that is somewhere in there in all of the contributions as well. So I'd like to just throw it open to our wider audience. I'm not, I think the people on the panel will have opportunities to talk again, but maybe if we could get some contributions from the rest of the audience. I saw some hands going up, thumbs going up and things there during the conversations. Now we also have a chat. So I'm not sure if there anything there. No, nothing there at the moment. So maybe we just take any questions or comments from the wider group.
If I may.
Absolutely. Balash is president of UCAN, for those who don't know. So we're delighted to have you, Balash.
I think I just like to make a comment on what has been mentioned regarding smaller cities to have capacities and more sensitivity towards their own citizens, and to step forward to make a learning city more of a reality than just a label itself. And I work in a town which is not very big, 140,000 people, and we have a learning city community, roughly about 2,000 people working around this thing, and I do believe that the impact is much wider than the size, and I'm very much concerned if we do nothing more than just to learn from other cities as we do here. Those reflections are very much important to learn from, and I think I would like to just use the term what we learned from Paulo Freire. Sometimes there's the time for silence and to pay attention to others. And I think it is very important these days to pay attention to others. I learned a lot from Cork. I learned a lot from other cities, not just in Europe, but beyond. Not big cities, but very influential, very innovative, very humanistic in many sense. And I think if we just don't do more, then that emphasize that UCAN is supporting learning city developments where it is the deep message of learning how to change, but also how to recognize values and principles that may move humanistic knowledge sharing and transfer. This is enough. And I'm very much honored that I could enjoy, unfortunately not all, but your input, which is absolutely valuable. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Balash. So would some others like to make a comment or respond to what Balash has just said? I also see in our audience here, Eric, who has been moderating this session with me. So Eric, I don't know if you want to say something at this point.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, well, I was very interested in what people said about, you know, the transitions, because I think that this is one of the key words. The imaginaries that Christine mentioned is, to me, a very good point too, and we should dedicate some part of the work that we have undertaken. We should dedicate it to this concept. The other thing that is very interesting is what was said by Xavier at the very end. I think that this idea of building networks and changing our strategies in the way that we work in different universities is part of the thing that we really have to work on in the very near future. But as you said, it's easier said than done because, well, there is always a gap between the time when we make the major decision of moving forward and the time it is implemented. So I think that we should give examples, or we should have a strategy. And I think that instead of keeping on, you know, listing the different ideas, so we could make the decision today collectively. Christine is launching something new in a lifelong learning perspective. So why not working collectively and trying to implement collectively different things for students around Europe? So this would be a starting point, because if it works, we would have an example of the way that based on the collective ideas or the way that we collectively define things, we came to an agreement and then eventually we implemented it. And that could be a good starting point, and we would see in 2 years from now what we could tell at the European level or our national levels in our national networks to have things done this way. So yes, it was very interesting to me what was said during this week and the different ideas that have been, you know, presented by all the people involved into this forum. And I thank you for the coordination of all this as well.
Thank you very much, Eric. Nicholas, did I see your hand go up?
Oh, it's Christine. Christine.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Christine. No, maybe it's just I was on the wrong page. Yeah. Sorry. Yes, Christine.
Yes, it's funny that Eric proposed. Well, I mean, funny because we work together, but we haven't thought about that yet. But I think that I was very impressed by what said Xavier about how much university does not cope with the real world, and I think he's really right on that. And I wanted to say, why not develop within UCAN short programs for teachers or lifelong learners along the lines suggested by Xavier, we could do a multidisciplinary, multi-actor with the sole aim of understanding the challenges we face and learning to think about how to deal with them in teaching. I mean, that we could absolutely design some kind of, I don't know, program or webinar about, well, you know, talking to every teacher in the world that that have the same question that we have, and trying to get some answers, collective answers, I mean.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Christine. And I think this is probably the raison d'etre of an organization like UCAN in any case. So it's probably activating our core mission. So others, and I'm sorry, there are two screens, so if I missed somebody putting their hand up, my apologies.
Seamus, I wanted to point out that Edalberto has put something interesting on the chat, and I was going to say to Christine that we could certainly consider the possibility, but I'm not totally sure. I mean, I don't think UCAN can award credits, for example, or so we will have to see which is the formula of offering courses, how this can be done. So maybe we should talk.
But Carmen, precisely Xavier was saying that we don't need credits.
Oh, well, yeah, that is true.
I mean,
yeah,
some people does need them.
Yes, but we also had Annalisa's gone now yesterday, but Annalisa was talking about communities of practice yesterday. So I mean, this could be something for a community of practice
absolutely.
as well. Yeah,
let's think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. So anybody else like to comment? It was interesting in the reflections that Eric was talking about. There was around some of the words that people used, and again, I thought that was a quite interesting. Some words came to me, you know, very forcibly from the different contributions. And Lisa used one of the words she used was leverage points. You know, I thought it was an interesting idea. Places where we can affect change. I really liked the word translations that Nicholas was using, because that's so key, I suppose, to how we understand the world and how we understand it in different ways. And even if you take the word translation in a purely linguistic way, you know, when we engage with other linguistic ways of thinking and understanding, you know, our whole world changes. The thing that really struck me from Amin, the word was children, you know, because you kept coming back to this one. You couldn't escape that one, and it's just such an important thing in terms of future and where we're going. You know, we started our children and work from there. The imaginaries, again, which Eric mentioned, was the word I think that came from me from your presentation, Christine, because that really, as lifelong learners, that really is our challenge to me. That's a really central challenge, to be able to imagine and conceive of the world in different ways, because and even this was one that Xavier, that came exactly into your presentation as well, around universities. The capacity to imagine ourselves doing something different, acting in a different way, being a different kind of a force in the world is so important, you know. So I just thought there was a very nice bridge between both of you on that particular topic and theme. So, you know, there's a lot of challenges going on here, but there's a lot of possibilities as well, I think, and that's really coming through from this session for me. They were just some of my quick views. I don't know if anybody else would like to pitch in and maybe respond to some of those. I'm sure other people picked up different words and different themes from what people said. Yes, Nicholas.
If I can, yes, probably. I think that it's really difficult to be in whole works now, because we are in a world, like Amin says, in a world where the capitalists, where the ideology, it's really strong, and it's so strong that we can meet this ideology everywhere in the university too, everywhere in whole knowledge way, or everywhere in the whole world. That it's really difficult to be outside of this way of thinking. It's really difficult for our students, it's really difficult for the university to be outside of this way of thinking, because it's such a difficult work. It's such a difficult work because we have to change whole paradigm. We have to change whole way to thinking, and we have to work a lot to be outside of this way of thinking. That it's something difficult when at the same time we have always a lot of things to do. We have always a lot of courses. We have a lot of some administration papers to do. We have a lot of things. We have a lot of, and it's really difficult for all of university people, of all teachers, to be in these hard works, to be outside of the way of thinking, or outside of the ideology way of thinking. It's difficult at the same time to be at the good place, to do the good work in university. That we have a word in French, and I'm not sure that in English it's the same, but we have a word in French to say the power of isomorphism. Isomorphism, it's the power of our context, it's the power of the ideology to attract us inside of the ideology, inside of our usual way of thinking. And this isomorphism, it's really difficult to fight against. And we have to try to be in a collective work, to trying to work outside the way of usual thinking, because alone it's impossible. It's always a collective building. It's always a collective work. It's that way it's important to be in this kind of network, of ULLL network, to trying to be outside of the way of thinking, but together in a collective way, because the social representation, social practice are always built, and always a building, a collective building way. But it's hard work. It's definitely a hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose maybe that's not unconnected to the whole neoliberal project either, because maybe it's not accidentally that we are tied up with a lot of stuff that we shouldn't do. Very quickly, we have Xavier, and then we have Amin, and then I wanted to just mention some contribution from Edalberto in the chat as well. So maybe in that order.
Thank you. Yeah, just very briefly, and also to apologize at 4 sharp, I will have to leave. Just to say, I think that listening at a ULLL discussion, I mean, this is really very interesting. I think the challenge is that if you present your aims in such an extraordinarily complex way, no matter how challenging the problems are, then the risk is to discourage the practitioner. But I think that actually the challenge is rather simple than that. You know, you have higher education institutions that since Humboldt, and that's 1810, have defined their mission as seeking excellence measured by peers. Now that might be okay 150 years ago, but today is simply not enough, because the challenge in a knowledge society is to use knowledge to solve the challenges we have, and that the answer to that is lifelong learning. And I think that you can make a very powerful case for lifelong learning by just framing the discussion, not in terms of solving the problems of the world of capitalism, which is beyond anybody's reach, certainly beyond, I think, your reach, but actually in terms of changing the way universities think about their own service to society and their own mission. And that's a much more achievable goal, I think, and a very noble quest, I believe, for UCAN.
Thank you very much, Xavier and Amin. And I'm just very conscious we're very short on time. So, yeah.
No, just I would like to finish what I was talking about racism, particularly during the Second World War or before the Second World War, even when Hitler started to talk about the best race, German race, and we are the best in the world and so on. Nobody was caring about that at the time, but we could see what happened in Europe and how he started to destroy everywhere and to attack every country. And now, I was talking a few days ago about the rise of far-right political parties. Now we don't care, okay? And we are helping them too. European Union is helping, in fact, far-right political parties. They could access funding from European Union Parliament or Commission, and now with that money they are creating everything to spread racism everywhere. That is what I'm talking about. We are unfortunately not learning, and we have to create a mechanism, a system that we will be able to teach our leaders and our next generation, our children, students, and so on.
Okay, thank you, Amin. And just very quickly, just to run through the points made by Edalberto. I think two key points really. One was around facing the really, really critical challenges we face today and getting the agenda at the university to address those, and that came up in Christine. You certainly referred to it, and I think it was in a theme through all the presentations. You know, this idea of responding to the issues and problems of the day, and I really like Edalberto's second comment around human rights, respect, and cultural diversity. You know, and again, this is a key point in Amin's presentation, but you know, when it comes down to it, this is really where it's actually at. It's about respecting each other, respecting individuals, respecting diversity, respecting different identities and different ways of seeing the world and different ways of expressing ourselves and so on. And I suppose as educators, we really need to be able to take that on board. I'm sorry, we're really up on time. But one thought before we end, and it may be worth reminding ourselves that education is part of lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is not part of education. You know, the big thing is lifelong learning. Education is the small component part of it. And sometimes we get that the other way around. We think of education as the big thing and that lifelong learning is a sub part of education. It's the other way around. Education is just a tiny part of the project. So this was really, really interesting. It's a pity we don't have a little bit longer to go on, because I think we were really getting places, and maybe, as Christine, you mentioned, maybe sometime we can get to do this in the real world, where we're all in the same place with some people, because I think that would be useful. And I think there is a good combination between, you know, maybe the hybrid model where we can actually get into the same space and debate and discuss these things, and maybe some people can be online as well, and maybe this is the future. But we do, I think, need the human contact with each other to develop these. A huge thank you to the people who contribute to this panel during the week, to Christine, to Amin, Nicholas, and I'm sure I should say Nicola or Nicholas, I'm not sure which.
It can be the two, Nicolas, Nicola, it's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, don't worry.
All right. And Elisa and Xavier, and also to Eric, who worked on this with me. And thank you all, the participants. We had good participation during the week, and I think we had some really inspiring and interesting conversations. And thankfully it's all recorded. And Karma, this is available to people somehow? They can just...
Yes, it will be available in the YouTube channel of UCAN. And now, if you allow me, I just put very, very quickly the slide of the next week, because next Monday we change the topic. We'll have Designing Flexible Learning for Adults, dialogue between university, lifelong learning, and professional contexts. And we will have the masterclass of Micaela Martin from UNESCO with the title of the presentation, Flexible Pathways in Higher Education. I invite you all to join us next Monday. If you have not registered for next week, please do, and you will receive the link to that Zoom room. So I hope to see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you.